All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. I'm Naomi Grunditz, not Councilman Sandoval, but I am logged in to our account. And this is part of our Ask a Planner series. And this is a place where we give an opportunity to different departments, different planners of all ranges to come and do general open Q&A with the community. It's meant to be very casual, to ask more technical questions, really whatever you all want. In the past, we've had planners from the actual planning department talking about affordable housing. We've had planners from talking about parking and transportation. And today we are super lucky to have Denver Water. They're going to be talking about how Denver Water's planning for a growing population, for climate challenges, and things like that, and especially about accessory dwelling units and maybe some of our older neighborhoods that are also increasing in density, and just how our water infrastructure will handle that. As I mentioned before as well, we are super lucky that a couple of folks from the Department of Transportation and Infrastructure that work in wastewater and our sanitary systems are also on this call. I'm not going to put them on the spot right now, but if questions around those also come up, they may be able to jump in and answer. Because again, it's this whole ecosystem of different departments and different agencies that work with our water. So with that, thanks again, everyone, for being here. Thank you, community members. This is also being streamed live on Facebook. So if you are on Facebook, feel free to put any questions in the chat. If you're on our Zoom meeting, feel free to put your questions as well in the chat. And once we open up to Q&A, we'll pull from both those on Facebook and Zoom to ask our panelists here. Also, if it's a smaller group, and sometimes we'll just say, if you want to ask your question live, raise your hand virtually. There's a raise a hand function, and we will call on you and you can unmute yourself and ask your question. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Denver Water and a presentation that they have prepared for us. I believe I have gave co-presenter. There we go. Awesome. So feel free to introduce yourself and your team and take it away.
Already was on mute. There we go. So my name is Janine Shaw, and I'll be running the slideshow. And I want to introduce my colleagues, Greg Fisher and Austin Kirchmerich, who will be doing the presentation today. And we also have Lindsay Schultz and Jeff Terrell on the line to help answer any questions. So with that, I will go ahead and share my screen and kick it off to you, Greg. Let me make sure, is everybody seeing the PowerPoint presentation?
Looks good.
All right, so just let me know next slide.
Great, thanks. Thanks, Janine. Thanks everybody for attending this. I think we're always excited to share information about Denver Water and how we're not only trying to meet all of our customer needs today, but also into the future. And we're going to give you a little bit of insight into that, but certainly want to leave time for all of your questions as well. So this will be pretty brief, our comments, and then hopefully answer your specific questions. You can move to the next, Janine. So we'll give you a little bit of the Denver Water overview, some of the challenges facing us, if you haven't seen some of them in the news recently, how we really plan for the long term and making sure that we can meet our customers' needs decades into the future. And then I'll hand it over to Austin to talk specifically about water efficiency and how we help you become more efficient in your water use. And then open it up for your questions. Go to the next, thanks. Just a few facts about Denver Water. We turned 100 a couple years ago, which was a fun celebration. And I think we have a good legacy of serving our customers through that 100 years and for the next. We serve about 1.5 million people. That's about a quarter of the state's population, and only use about 2% of the water used in the state. So there's a big source of pride for us on behalf of our customers. So for such an efficient use of water. Our water supply comes from snowmelt in the Rocky Mountains. About half of that comes from the South Platte, and half of it comes from the Colorado River. And if you've seen any news stories this year, the Colorado River is having a very poor year. So we really have to understand what's happening on the larger Colorado River that serves 7 states and over 40 million people, plus a big proportion of our fruits and vegetables in the country. So really keeping track of what's happening on both sides of the Continental Divide is important to us. We have a big watershed of over 4,000 square miles, lots of pipe in our service area, 3,000 miles of pipe. We have over 1,000 employees working in 5 counties. And then a big water system that includes 20 dams, 12 reservoirs, 4 treatment plants, and 18 pump stations just to get water to our customers every day. So a lot of work that goes on a day-to-day basis that you may not see. I think that's the harder part when we have buried infrastructure. It's hard to see all the work that goes on there. You can go to the next. We'll head into challenges that we're facing. And as I mentioned before, one of the bigger ones is that Colorado River Basin. This is a pretty good map of where that goes and which states rely on that. So including Colorado, it's New Mexico, Arizona, Utah, Nevada, California, and Wyoming, and even Mexico relies on some of that water. And a big portion of that water goes to California and Las Vegas and many cities in Arizona. And so we really have to figure out how to use and share that water equitably. That's been an interesting discussion over the last 100 years. And when you have years like this, that conversation gets a little more heated and tense, and we certainly are actively involved in those negotiations in the future of the Colorado River. So that's one thing that we make sure that we are managing very carefully to make sure that we have adequate supply in the future. You can go to the next. So one of the things Naomi set up really well was climate change. And this is one of my favorite graphs just to show you what's been happening over the last 20 years. It doesn't make me happy, but I think it really paints a picture. What this graph shows you is the average number of 90-degree days that we've measured over the last 70 years. That's the horizontal line. So more 90-degree days in a year are above that line in red. Fewer 90-degree days are below that line in blue. Since 2000, you can see almost every year we've had more 90-degree days, and we've set records time after time in the 2000s. And in fact, last year we broke the record for number of 90-degree days that we have ever seen in Denver. And that was surpassed by 2012 and 2002. So we are seeing some surprising trends, frankly, in climate change. It's whenever we speak about climate change, we talk about that in change in terms of decades, but we're actually seeing this from a year-to-year basis. We know that we have to actively plan to meet those changes in terms of how our customers use water and what water needs they have given climate change. So we are doing that, helping our customers be more efficient with the way they water landscapes, what landscapes they choose, certainly figuring out how we cool our buildings. Water is an important part of that. So very actively managing climate change on the use side, and certainly trying to understand what will happen to our supplies as temperatures warm and precipitation becomes more variable. Go to the next. Population, it won't surprise you, has been growing pretty steadily since the World War II, but it's also been developing in very interesting ways. Back right at the end of World War II, we had primarily single family homes. About 70% of the households we served were single family, but you can see that proportion has really leveled off, and we serve about half of our single family homes, and half of the households we serve are multifamily now. We expect that higher densities to change over time, and that really changes how people use water. The biggest change there is single family homes tend to have lawns, and multifamily homes have far less landscape to water. So people in multifamily homes use far less water, but the water use profile changes, and that presents some opportunities for us and also some challenges. So understanding how this area is growing is really important to our future. You can go to the next. And we have some examples of rapid land use change. I suspect the people on this call have been in Denver and have seen this change. You can switch to the next. So the start was in 2010. We go to 2014, and this is just a single block in the Sloan's Lake neighborhood. And then to the next one, Janine. Finally, we went from about 16 single family homes to over 65 households in this single block. So you can see how that growth has really changed. A lot less landscape, a lot more indoor use. But one key here is that you still want to have enough landscape and in particular trees to make sure that we're shading and cooling. So as we have more impervious surface like hardscape, that we're able to cool the areas around us, particularly as the climate warms. So we're really careful to understand how things change and how we can help maintain a very livable city with those changes. You can go to the next one. So how do we plan for all this? And one of the epiphanies we had about a decade ago was that we really can't predict the future very well anymore. There are so many things happening, whether it's climate change or growth or the economy or even the politics that we get wrapped up in. It's very hard to predict the future. So we adopted a scenario planning framework where we actually prepare for multiple futures. Knowing that we won't be able to predict the exact outcome, we look at some of the biggest threats and opportunities in the water industry and really create futures 50 years out and make sure that we're prepared for any one of them. So we do extensive planning and preparing for all the things that may come at us, even things that are completely unpredictable or unexpected, like COVID. Right when COVID hit, we went into a scenario planning exercise to understand how we were going to get through that in the next couple of years to make sure we had the right workforce, to make sure we were spending the right amount of money to maintain our water system. So this has served us very well, really to become a nimble and adaptable organization, because again, it's, these things are coming at us quickly and they are impossible to predict. So we feel like we are very prepared for the future and to meet our customer needs, whatever they are and however we grow. We have a lot of plans in place for whatever path we may see in the future. So there's a pretty quick snapshot of what we're looking at in terms of challenges and how we prepare for those. I think Austin's going to dive a little bit deeper on the efficiency side now. The last thing I would say is that instead of really putting all of our efforts into one area, we take an all of the above approach. So what we're doing actively right now is trying to enlarge some of our existing supplies. We are recycling water and building out that system to use for irrigation and industrial purposes. And then efficiency is a big part of our plan. So again, to fit with the scenario planning theme, we have a big portfolio of solutions so that we don't rely on one thing to get us through all of those challenges. The last, whenever we are all able to start getting together with people, again, we just rebuilt our Denver Water campus and are trying to lead with the efficiency and One Water solutions that we think are important for the future. I won't go too much into detail here, but a lot of it is picking the right landscapes, reusing water where we can within the building, and making sure the urban water cycle is being taken care of. That was perfect, Janine. You actually did that well as I transition to Austin. So Austin's going to dive into the efficiency side a little bit more deeply now.
Thanks, Greg. That was great. Give us a good high-level vision of what Denver Water is doing. And I'm going to jump into more what we can do at a local level, especially with ADUs. And a lot of that just starts with our development process and how we interact with the city and county of Denver through new development. So Denver Water has really shifted in the last few years, and we've gone kind of from a traditional water conservation, targeting retrofit old properties and things like that, to moving the conservation efforts up to new development and getting the greenest technologies, the most efficient technologies put in right from the get-go, so that we're not having to go back and retrofit all these things over time. So the large ones that we're really doing is water efficient fixtures indoors, moving landscapes to what's called hydrozoning. So you group all your plants together either in a high water, medium water, low water, or no water area so that they get the right amount of water, using very efficient spray nozzles and weather-based smart controllers are kind of the largest things we can do. Next slide, Janine. And that really leads us to the question is, how much water do ADUs typically use? When we first introduced ADUs as accessory dwelling units to Denver several years ago, Denver Water was concerned that this would be a big demand that we weren't really accounting for. But when we look at it on a individual property, it's really not so bad. On average, an ADU adds about 500 gallons per month, but it really changes the use profile that Denver Water sees. Instead of, if this is previously a property that has been irrigated, a lot of the use for irrigation actually gets shifted to a baseline use. So we don't see as much summertime peaking, just more consistent use throughout the year. A couple ways to make ADU become more water neutral would be having the homeowner replace all the toilets in the existing house with high efficiency toilets, and then redoing the exterior of the house, the landscape, with a partner of ours, Resource Central, puts together a kind of plant by number garden, and it's called Garden in a Box. And if you replace about 200 to 300 square feet with low water plantings, that will really cut your outdoor water use even further. And then the last thing that's helpful for people that have ADUs and use them to rent out for supplemental income or anything like that is putting in a submeter for the ADU itself, so that you can kind of track how much water the main house is using and how much water the ADU will be using. And then that can also help you kind of split out the water bill appropriately so that the tenant is paying their fair share. And then this is something that we encourage all customers to do. Denver Water sends out a water efficient use email every month to about just over half of our customers right now. So we send out about 120,000 emails a month. And this gives you a real high level look at your property, whether you're watering efficiently or inefficiently. And depending on your efficiency level, you get different marketing materials sent to you. So this one shows a customer that's inefficient, and we're giving recommendations on how to increase efficiency through toilet rebates or switching out fixtures. And then for our efficient customers, it's more like a digital pat on the back saying, good job, you're doing great. Here's some interesting stories of what Denver Water is currently doing, what's kind of some issues that Denver Water is seeing, and here are some techniques to continue to be efficient. For the outdoor side, this email also sends a use report that kind of helps you track your use on outdoor side. Janine, if you could go to the next slide. And this just gives you a target based on the landscape that we commonly see in Denver single family houses, which roughly 50% of the space is turf grass. 33% is lower water use. That could be anything from shrubs to mulch beds or things like that. And then about 16% of the permeable area is in hardscapes or other features that are not irrigated at all. Again, every property is different. And since we're sending this out to so many different properties, it is really just kind of like an average of what we see on the ground. So any one property could be different. The example on here is actually a property that has more grass than the average one. So they are exceeding our budget, but not so high that it's concerning considering what's on their property. Next slide, please. So the best practices to have for ADUs, again, sign up for the efficient use email that I just kind of went over. To do that, the easiest way is probably calling the Denver Water customer care line 303-893-2444 and talk to one of our wonderful call center people, and they'll get you signed up if you don't already receive this. Replace any areas that you're not really using turf grass with low water gardens. A good way to go about that is partnering with our partner Resource Central and getting a few gardening boxes. Super easy, takes a couple years for them to really fill out and become like a full landscape, but once they do, they look great. And then a few rebates we offer: smart controllers. So anything that's WaterSense labeled, we'll give a rebate up to $75. Replacing toilets with anything less than 1.1 gallons per flush, we'll give up to $100 rebate. Again, has to be WaterSense labeled. And then replace all faucets with WaterSense labeled. And then the last one, shower heads, we don't actually rebate for those, but typically Excel will give them away for free, either at events or previously you could email them and get a free shower head from them. And that one's a great thing to do because you're saving two things with a shower head. You're saving water, and then also the electricity or natural gas that it takes to heat that water. And then here's kind of the up and coming what property managers are really looking towards: smart water management, and that is kind of a whole house. This, similar to what we do with our meters, this is a device that will meter your water flow, but at a much finer grain than what Denver Water does. We take a monthly snapshot and we capture how much water you use and bill you on that. But this, these technologies will get down to gallon use, and it basically has a small either meter that it is reading itself, or it can, some of them can clamp right onto your main water line. But we ask that you don't use any of the ones that mess with the meter itself. So it has to be on your side of the property and installed there, because we don't want anything interfering with Denver Water meters. But this gets down to, you can flush a toilet and then see it on your phone. You can turn on your kitchen sink, you can run it for 5 minutes and see how much water you used. You can track all your sprinkler use if you have an irrigated or an automatic irrigation system. And the cost on these devices varies greatly, anywhere from $200 to upwards of $700. Some insurance companies will actually offset some of that cost for you, because if these smart water management meters detect a leak, they'll automatically shut the water off on the property, so it can lower potential insurance for flood risk and things like that. But this is really kind of the wave of the future, and we haven't seen a ton of these installed yet, but something to definitely look at if you're operating an ADU and trying to recoup some of your costs on that. And now we'd love to open it up to any questions that anyone has for any of us.
Thank you so much. That was a super comprehensive, and it's such a fascinating topic, especially as you mentioned with just the scenario planning, even of like how quickly things are changing. So it's super interesting. We already have one question in the chat, kind of a concrete question about the Garden in a Box program. Jeff was wondering if it's partially subsidized.
It used to be, and Denver Water pays a lot of kind of overhead costs to partner with Garden in a Box, so it is somewhat subsidized by how we partner with them. But we don't offer additional $25 off like we used to. So now it's just whatever each garden has a different price tag to it on their website, and that's just what the price is now.
Mm-hmm. And I will add in that even without an additional subsidy, it's still a screaming deal. The gardens themselves are between, I think, 70 square feet and about 100 square feet per each garden. And they're a really good deal. I have 2 of them in my front yard.
Nice. So yeah, people continue to put questions in the chat or ask to be unmuted. We can unmute you. I'd like to know a little bit more about how, I think it was Greg maybe that mentioned when ADUs were first kind of online, when they became well, accessory dwelling units, things like carriage houses, have existed in Denver for a while, since the beginning. You can wander around and you can see tons of, especially the actual carriage houses. But since in 2010, we got our new current zoning code. Maybe you could talk a little bit more about kind of what those initial concerns were. And because I think that's a lot of the same concerns that some of our constituents have when they think about like, oh, well, this neighborhood has been just single unit forever. It was designed to be that way. How the heck are we going to be like expecting, ADUs and that have more residents in them? And so those are the questions that we tend to get a lot.
Austin, I think that was more your.
Oh, sorry, that was for Austin.
Yeah, no worries. So yeah, when we originally kind of looked at that, we were a little bit worried about that because we're trying to figure out how much landscape a typical ADU would replace, and typically, from the kind of empirical study we did, we saw that it was either properties that had no ADU or no garage before, or a one-car garage that was being torn down and then being replaced with something that had a footprint of typically about a 3-car garage, maybe even a little larger. So we're looking at square footages, I think between 750 and 1,000 square feet of landscape being converted from usable landscape over to impervious area. And typically what Denver Water sees as kind of a benchmark of a per person per month is 40 gallons per person per month. So if you're replacing landscape with a use of anywhere from 1,200 to 2,400 gallons per month, that's really where we're seeing, like, it is a slight increase when you add an ADU, but it's not so large that it's concerning to us. From a Denver Water standpoint, there are still other concerns about construction noise and having more people in the neighborhoods and things like that. But strictly from a water standpoint, the infrastructure in the ground in most neighborhoods is plenty to handle what you would see by adding ADUs on just about every house.
That's super interesting to hear. I think I have heard some questions about literally the diameter of the pipes that are in the ground. I don't know if you have, what does it, if any of you could speak to, what does it look like in terms of some of those supply lines in our older single family neighborhoods versus, like, I used to live in Cap Hill. We've got a bunch of high rises there, but also older single family homes.
Yeah, it's amazing, and this is really a testament to how our customers have become more efficient over time. So So that efficiency has really outpaced growth and what we would need from even higher densities. So, you know, it really depends on what specific area of Denver you're talking. There are some isolated areas where we will need to upsize our pipes, but by and large, we won't need to upsize our pipes purely because our customers have become so efficient. And one stat here, and I don't know if I told you, Naomi, is that just to give you a great example of this. So we measured water use from January to May this year, and that's the lowest first 5 months of the year that we have seen in over 50 years, regardless of the growth that we've seen. So yeah, so our customers are doing an amazing job, and the water system we have right now is going to work for us for a long time.
That is great to hear. And super fascinating. Yeah.
One thing I would add to that as well, we often get questions about who pays for what in terms of development. And we do have our manager in our water sales department on the call here. And I'm hoping maybe she can speak to that a little bit about when a development comes in, if something has to be upsized, who pays for that? So I'm going to maybe toss it over to you, Lindsay.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, thanks, Janine. Yeah, when that topic came up, I was debating whether or not to chime in. So yeah, there are situations. I mean, it is mostly true what Greg said about, you know, the pipes that are in the ground are, you know, going to be sufficient enough for us for a very long time. But there are situations where we have like large developments come in. So for example, we're seeing more situations where, you know, a developer may come in and, you know, scrape maybe 1 or 2 single family homes, and in the place of that, put some multifamily type situation. So this is above and beyond the ADU topic. This is more large multifamily type of situations. And then what we tend to see happen is when you have more people, exponentially more people living in a smaller space, you tend to introduce more fire requirements. So there's the need for potentially more fire hydrants in the neighborhood, and or, you know, fire sprinkler systems that are going to be needed in those large buildings. So those are situations where we tend to see the infrastructure in the ground. There's a need for that to be larger in order to support those fire requirements. And so in those situations, the expense of that construction is on the development itself versus Denver Water, because the need for the additional flow is as a result of the development. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, great. Thanks. Hey, Eric, I assume you have a question.
How's it going, Naomi?
Hey, good to see you.
I have a couple questions.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'll just put some stuff into context. So I'm Eric Reimars. Naomi and I have been working together. I'm part of the Highlands Neighborhood Association. So we've been talking about ADUs a lot. But I also wear a couple more hats. I work for a private developer downtown called Urban Villages. I have a hotel on 14th and Court, right across from the Webb building called Populous, and then a couple sites in Golden Triangle that we're looking to develop. And then I'm also involved in the Civic Center Conservancy as well. So just a couple of quick questions. I don't really know where to start, but you mentioned that like water, and specifically related to ADUs, like the water lines were kind of appropriately sized. It seemed like everybody felt good about that, other than a couple of areas. What about the sanitary lines? Do you guys see any issues with sizing of sanitary lines as a result of these ADUs rezonings that is happening across the city?
I can speak to that one. This is Jim Turner with DOTI, Denver DOTI, Department of Transportation and Infrastructure, formerly Public Works, in case everyone doesn't know what DOTI is. I'd say for ADUs, those kind of like Denver Water sees, those aren't necessarily creating a large capacity demand on our system. They're relatively small. They do increase the sanitary discharge because those properties do consume a little bit more water that goes down the drain. I'd say our larger issue in the areas that are doing ADUs is the example that Greg Fisher showed in a slideshow, a block by Sloan's Lake that had single family homes and it's been replaced with quite a bit of townhome units. So that block went from maybe 16 units to 60 or 80 over the years. In those neighborhoods, those are the one example of projects that are causing challenges for our sanitary capacity, but not nearly as much with ADUs because it's just not a large increase in flows.
So if anything did kick that scale to have to increase that, out of curiosity, who would be responsible for those costs? And Sloan's Lake example, and actually, funny story, the image that you showed, that used to be my old house. The one row home in from the south.
Interesting. A small city, huh?
But yeah, and like in that scenario, like if that block, increased density and that did need to upsize sanitary lines, who would be responsible for paying that?
Let me get my video on here. That's a good question. Generally, the city has taken on responsibility of upsizing mains of the larger trunk lines. So with all these developments happening, there's an increased flow in sanitary. Generally, these neighborhoods have 8-inch diameter pipes feeding them. If you chase those things downstream, they eventually join together into 10-inch, 18-inch, 30-inch pipes. That's generally where the city is focusing our investment because those pipes are now becoming too small too. So we're focusing our funding on upsizing those mains. The smaller 8-inch mains up towards the upper end of these basins that serve these ADUs and townhomes are generally the responsible of the developers of those properties. So if a sanitary sewer has extra capacity, people can build on that without any cost tied to the sanitary sewer other than the tap fee. But once those sewers are shown to be full, then no additional projects can be added until a developer makes the investment to upsize those mains. So in these areas, it's generally developer responsibility to improve those mains.
So is there like a demarcation then to say main versus I'll call it like a tributary or like a secondary or tertiary line that
Yep.
If the main needs to be increased, that's the Denver Water responsibility. But if there's the secondary line, that would be the developer's responsibility.
The line is at 10-inch and larger, generally 10-inch and larger. Denver wastewater, I'll clarify, not Denver water, but Denver wastewater.
Sorry, okay.
Would be responsible to improve those. 8-inch mains would be developer responsibility in general. That's not always the case.
Yeah. Can I ask a quick follow-up question on that? At what point does this trigger? Is this at the site development plan review phase?
It's determined during that process, generally, yes.
Okay. So for jargony, the SDP, site development plan, is when a project is actually going through this review. It's submitting its plans to the city. It gets reviewed by all these different departments, and they have to sign off on it, and any requirements are stipulated at that point. So,
correct.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, and it really, the developers are made aware at the beginning of that site development plan process, which is called the concept process.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of the
Yes.
initial pre-application for a site development plan.
And there's another application called a SUDP, a sewer use and drainage permit. That's when all the calculations kind of get done. You get into tricky situations if you defer like pool permits, and how much kind of discharge from like the pools going into the sanitary lines, kind of where that would kick things over the line. There's a story that I heard, I'm not sure if it's true or not, but one of the developers in Golden Triangle designed their property to be within like 99.9% of the capacity. So whoever the next developer that was coming online, whether it's a multi-hundred unit development or a small office, would have kicked straw that broke the camel back sort of thing. Not sure if that's true or not, but Yeah,
I've seen that scenario in the Golden Triangle.
Mm.
Yeah, I think I know the one you're talking about.
yeah. So is there just on Golden Triangle, is there any issues? And like I said, we are, looking at projects down there. Is there any water main or sanitary or storm issues down there that you guys are still working through, or is that mostly upgraded? I know on I think Acoma, there was a line that got upsized from a sanitary perspective.
For sanitary, there are some city projects to be upsizing some of the larger mains. And we know there's still some of the smaller 8-inch mains that are still an issue that will be developed and improved in kind of a piecemeal fashion as needed by developers.
Got it.
Awesome. I have a question from Facebook. Or Eric, do you have more questions? So we talked about how right now at kind of the site development, like when an actual building project is proposed, but for both Dottie and for Denver Water, what about Denver's planning processes? So for instance, right now, District 1 has the West Area Plan, which is a small neighborhood plan that's kind of at the end, getting towards the end of its phase, covers parts of West Colfax. And we're also kicking off the Near Northwest Area Plan. So these plans don't change zoning. They don't say, once the plan is passed, it doesn't make it so that what was a single unit neighborhood is all of a sudden zoned to allow a multi-unit. But it does show the community's vision for the suggestions and guidelines for future decisions like that. So in terms of how do your agencies or departments get a look at those plans, because obviously you may have some concerns, like what if based on this planning process, the neighborhood is saying, oh, well, this part of the neighborhood, we'd be fine with seeing triplexes or higher, or maybe around this light rail station, we'd be fine seeing, some higher apartments. Do you get to look at those suggestions and say, hey, wait a minute, we know that our infrastructure here is not going to be able to handle that, or at least we need to have a plan for how to increase it if that's the vision that we want to get to? Maybe Denver Water, you could go first on that.
I'll jump in and say that from an efficiency and conservation standpoint, we have worked with CPD, Community Planning and Development, several times, but kind of a step up from there on their comprehensive plan, and then the Denverite process of kind of the guiding language that should be put in place just to make sure that we're allowing ourselves to develop more efficiently with water in the future. But we don't get into, at the kind of planning level, specific strategies where we really see our strategies of what we want builders to be doing. We incorporate that more into the building code, plumbing code, and that side of things. And one process that's currently going on is we're working with City and County of Denver on the next code cycle of developing kind of the green codes and seeing what worked the last time around and what should be moved from green codes into standard code. So that's kind of the process that we work through. But if there are specific questions, I think a community level plan was concerned with around 41st and Fox was a good example where CPD reached out to us and wanted to make sure that kind of the upzoning that they were suggesting would have enough water infrastructure to be able to kind of proceed with redevelopment in that area.
Great. Does Dottie have any input on that? Sorry, I keep
I'll add to that. For Dottie, we have a sanitary sewer master plan that we update every 5 years roughly. And that takes into account the existing zoning across the city. So anytime an area is changed in zoning, generally upzoned, that master plan is updated. And that master plan helps inform us to know where our larger sanitary system, our larger trunk lines need to be upsized. So that's how the city we use that to go through and upsize some of these larger mains, the 10-inch, the 24-inch, things like that. And it gives us a heads up that we probably have some of those 8-inch mains that are smaller and will probably need to be upsized. Our challenge in trying to tackle those ourselves is we don't know exactly when that development is going to pop. Some areas get upzoned and they explode pretty quickly in a few years, like Tennyson. Some areas don't go forward as quickly. So we don't want to go in and upsize a main prematurely and then it's not needed. And then that creates other problems with the main. Now the flows are too slow in there and the mains don't function as well. They tend to get solid buildup when a main is too big for the amount of flow in it. So that's how we're proactively doing it. We use that master plan to identify the larger mains that needs to be upsized. And then it gives us a little early warning on the smaller mains, but it doesn't allow us to change how we process them. We still have the developers upsize those mains as they go.
Great, thank you. Let's see, any other questions in the chat? Yeah, go ahead, Eric.
So two other quick questions, and I'll kind of coattail off what like LEED standards do to like IBC building codes for like mechanical systems, and incrementally always trying to get more efficient. Does Denver Water, is there any intent to try to be more efficient from a water use standpoint for things like low flow fixtures or anything like that? And I'm mainly looking at this more in like a multi-family development setting.
Yeah, absolutely. So in a multifamily or a larger development site, what we have been kind of working towards is developing a system development charge pilot where we want the most efficient fixtures that are on the market to go into those buildings. And if you hit a certain threshold on that, it's kind of site specific. Your redevelopment tap fee will decrease a little bit. This is kind of so far in the weeds and not really my area of expertise enough that I would say that if you have a project like that, reach out to us and we'll get you in contact with the right person. But that's really where the green code comes in to play. Is we're always trying to push the envelope of first making sure that it's available in the market. We want to be cutting edge, but probably not bleeding edge with the green code. And we want it to be with the developer that says, can I use this? And if it works, we absolutely say sure, but we don't want something to go in like the first round of low flow toilets that didn't really work very well and then gives everything a black eye and sets us back that way. So that's why I say cutting edge, but not bleeding edge. So we're always looking to see if it's commercially available. And if there's good reviews on it, we say, yeah, put it in. And we're definitely getting to the point where there's technology that's better than what EPA WaterSense is saying is the best on the market. So
are you saying this like incentivized program to reduce tap fees is already in place, or you guys are like
it's in place as a pilot currently?
Is there any developers that you're working with that are you're testing this out on?
Yeah, we've worked with several developers, and there's a lot of city projects that have gone through green codes that have been kind of recommended from the city to Denver Water that we've worked with as well. And it's more on the affordable housing side so far.
Got it.
But a couple commercial properties as well.
Well, I'd love to touch base with you offline on that if you're the appropriate contact. I do have a hotel project, and then we're looking at some multifamily projects as well. That any opportunities to reduce tap fees will make my finance team, who's listening to me right now, happy. So,
nice.
Lindsay, what is the email address that Eric can reach out to?
Yep, it's watersales@denverwater.org.
Great. I just threw that in the chat for you, Eric.
Thanks. Yeah, they have a packet that lists out all the like efficient fixtures and more information on the program for you.
Awesome. That helps out a lot. Thank you very much. And then my last question more has to do with irrigation. Is Denver Water looking at, or maybe they already have in place, any like gray water solutions, or I think the right term is TSC or treated sewage effluent, to supplement irrigation instead of kind of using the same mains as drinking as kind of potable water for irrigation for like the city parks or anything like that?
Yes, and yeah, that's a great question. A ton to unload there. There's so many different sorts of water qualities out there, and what Denver Water has really lumped these all into is our One Water future of finding the right water quality and putting that water quality to the right use. So a couple things that currently go on is we have a recycle water plant that we water a lot of the city parks with. And then gray water is allowed in city and county of Denver. We're just getting our first kind of households set up with gray water after that's been in place for about 5 years now. We haven't seen too many large scale gray water systems for multifamily, but in certain scenarios that can work really well when you have a lot of kind of residential use and the right amount of landscape. You can treat your gray water minimally and then put it out into mulch beds and things like that. But yeah, that would really be kind of a site by site kind of figuring out what exactly you're trying to do and figuring out the right solution for that.
Great. So we got 3 minutes left. Got another question kind of back to ADUs. The green building codes, or just, sorry, in general, the building codes that we were kind of talking about in terms of efficiency and stuff, those apply to an ADU, right? Or is there any difference between how, building an ADU would be required to do something differently in terms of water efficiency?
The just kind of general building code doesn't get into fixture levels. Typically, it's only under the voluntary green building code that we're saying what like each fixture, if it's a kitchen sink versus a lavatory sink or a shower head, should be using for gallons per minute typically. I don't think anything is really spelled out in the normal building code yet. But the best thing you can do if you are building an ADU is just get WaterSense labeled products, and that will get you in the ballpark of being efficient right off the bat.
Totally. I think I had a thought that this all wrapped up into, in terms of, again, the questions we get about what happens to these older neighborhoods that have just been built for, single unit homes, get ADUs on them. And that, these neighborhoods weren't built, they were built to handle single unit homes. They weren't built to handle things with ADUs, but also they weren't built to even foresee the level of efficiency that our new buildings are. And that when you are building something new, you're building a new accessory dwelling unit, even the fixtures that are just standard. And if you, wonderfully hope if you make the effort to get some super efficient stuff, it really does have even less of an impact than, I don't know if you could quantify this, but when these neighborhoods were built, say like 1910 or something like that, they were probably using an insane amount of water. Just toilet flushing, like everything, there was absolutely no standards on that. Yeah. So yes, our population has increased and we're building more, but it's also a really, really different kind of playing field.
Yes, that's a really good way to put it. Yep.
Cool. Well, thank you so much, everyone. We're right at the top of the hour. I don't know if anyone has any closing comments, or I'm gonna go ahead and thank you all.
Thanks so much for having us. We appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, this is absolutely fantastic. It's so important to be able, the reason we do this series too is just to actually connect constituents just directly with the experts. Like you have a question, like let's go ask them. I'm interested in learning about it too. I didn't know any of this going in. So this is just so fantastic. Thank you, Janine. Thank you, Greg. Thank you, Austin. Thank you, Jim, for jumping in there and me putting you on the spot, and Lindsay as well. I think that if there's any follow-up questions that people have for Denver Water, I know we've got the water sales at denverwater.org email in there. Is there any other way you would recommend people get in touch?
I went ahead and put my email in there, and I'm going to go ahead and put our call center email in there
Awesome.
as well.
Great.
Customer care. Yeah, there we go.
Thank you. And thanks to all the people watching on Facebook and on Zoom, and Eric for all your awesome questions. I'm so glad you're able to make it. We don't have our next Ask a Planner topic quite settled down, but hopefully we will be having one in July. We'll let you know. With that, have a fantastic weekend. Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thanks, Naomi.
Thank you.